The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome. We're delighted you're joining us here this morning, and we're looking forward to the presentation today. Just a few housekeeping notes. Everyone is on mute, so we can preserve the quality of the recording. If you have questions, please use the question function on the right-hand side of your control panel. And we will be collecting questions throughout the presentation, and then we will follow up with those questions after our session today. And if somehow you're unable, we're unable to answer your question, there will, like I said, definitely be contact with you directly with an answer. And most importantly, all participants today will receive a link to this recorded webinar as well as the presentation. This will be sent to you later this week. We're going to get going here in just a minute as we have a few more people joining us. So we'll just wait another minute here and then we'll get started, and it'll be my pleasure to introduce our presenter today, Ellen Karp. Okay, it looks like we've got everyone on for right now. So again, it's my pleasure to introduce to you Ellen Karp, who will be presenting our webinar today. We are excited to be looking at the second chapter of OEKO-TEX's The Key to Confidence, Consumers and Textile Sustainability Global Research Project. Today's findings will focus on two consumer sub-segments, millennials and parents, and look at how their attitudes about textile sustainability, harmful substances in textiles, and textile certification may differ. And presenting on behalf of OEKO-TEX today is global brand and sustainability expert Ellen Karp, who conducted this very important Key to Confidence research. Ellen, welcome, and we're delighted to have you with us today.
Thank you very much, Karen, and I'm delighted to be able to present the findings in terms of millennials and parents today. As you mentioned, it was clear from the outset that these were two very special groups. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about the study overall before we start looking more closely at millennials and parents. And I think many of you might have been at the first webinar when we reviewed the global findings. Just to quickly go over that, the study was commissioned by OEKO-TEX as part of its 25th anniversary celebration. It is and still remains groundbreaking research because it's the first research that focuses on the consumer rather than on the trade. If you recall, we did a very long survey, 20 to 25 minutes, with the general population in 10 countries: Australia, Brazil, Canada, China, Germany, India, Japan, Spain, Switzerland, and the US. It was fielded in July 2017, and the sample reflected the census data for each of the countries. So it was a representative sample, with the exception that all participants were the decision makers and shoppers for their household for clothes, and purchase clothes at least 3 times a year, and most of them also were purchasing home textiles as well. So basically, this sample was a general population sample representative of the population in each country, but the population of people who are buying clothes and home textiles. So to review very quickly what we learned. We learned, first of all, that climate change is indeed considered to be a real and very serious threat, particularly so for those who live in manufacturing areas. People want to do the right thing. If you were present at the earlier webinars, you might remember that again and again, people talked about doing the right thing and about taking small steps to be part of the solution and not part of the problem. People globally aspire to live more sustainably. and have high expectations of their brands to also do the right thing and show leadership and guidance, in fact, in this regard. We learned that concerns about textile sustainability are increasing. Globally, 4 in 10 people is already extremely or very concerned about harmful substances in the clothing and home textiles they purchase. And in manufacturing countries like India and China, that number goes up considerably. They're also very interested in knowing if the clothes and home textiles they purchase and use are safe from harmful substances and produced in an environmentally and socially responsible way. And finally, and very importantly, we learned that learning about the impact of the textile industry is a true game changer, as it inspires people to think about, purchase, and use textile products differently. Today, as you know, we're focusing on 2 very important groups, and we're going to start with millennials. So just a little review of who they are and who the generations are. I know that you know this, but just a little review. So the millennials are roughly defined as those born between 1981 to 2000. So currently they're between the ages of 18 and 36 to 37. So I'd like you just to think about that for a minute, because that is a very vital age range. The older millennials, ages 24 to 35, 36, 37, have probably started working their careers. Many have started to raise a family at this age. So it's a life stage that is really packed with new experiences and change. So it's a very basic one, and we'll see how that influences their clothing and home textile decisions in a couple of minutes. Generation X is the generation just before, born 1965 to 1980, so they're roughly between 37 and 52 years old. And then we have what we're calling the Boomers Plus, born from 1946 to 1964. Why plus? Well, we've got a few in our sample that were born before 1946. So this is really anybody in our sample, if in the mid-50s plus. Now, sometimes as we go through the deck, you're going to see comparisons of the 3 generations. I've tried to color code things, with the yellow, the kind of orange, the kind of brown. And sometimes you'll just see the data for the millennials versus boomers plus, and just to show any contrast that there might be and how things have really changed when you skip ahead 2 generations. So why are we looking at the millennials? Aside from the fact that they're very important to this study, they are the very near future. They're kind of the future now. They're the largest age cohort in the world, about 30% of the world's population. They came of age under the shadow of climate change. They've also been raised in a certified world. They've been raised knowing about organic food, for example. So they're used to looking at certification labels. They've grown up with it. And they're already particularly influential and will be increasingly so, because the older are starting to take leadership positions. So they are the world, more or less. Who were they? What the millennials in our sample of 11,000 people? 1 in 3 was a millennial. So we had about 3,200 of them. As you can see, we had 3 out of 10 were in that younger group, ages 18 to 24, and 7 in 10 were ages 25 to 34. So in that kind of vital age range where so much is just starting in terms of career, family, finishing school, etc. 56% of them already have children in the household. You can see that their education, they're quite well educated. And again, education and income were according to the definitions of each of the countries. So we didn't set a universal, but overall, 30% of them had higher education, 54% were either in school, currently they had medium education, and incomes, you see a preponderance at the lower end of the scale. And again, this is because they're starting out, they're starting careers, and that also has an impact on where they're shopping and what they're buying. So I thought I would share with you some information about their shopping behavior. One of the questions that we asked was where they have shopped in the past year, and gave them the list that you see in front of you. Again, this is not reflective of where they shop most often or where they prefer to shop. We didn't have time to ask that. So this is anywhere that they've shopped in the past year. And as you can see, they've shopped primarily at regular department stores, family apparel stores. They've shopped at exclusively online stores, and at fast fashion as the main venues. If you look towards the bottom at the 19%, the red, the line that I've highlighted in red, stores specializing in eco-friendly merchandise, they're much higher there than the overall sample. So they're shopping more in stores specializing in eco-friendly merchandise than others. So, so they're shopping at a wide range of venues. And as noted on the left side of the slide, they're more likely to shop online or at fast fashion retailers than those in other generations. So for example, while 56% of millennials have shopped online at exclusively online sites, so that includes Amazon, only 37% of boomers have done the same. And it's the same ratio for fast fashion retailers, where 50% of millennials have shopped there in the past year versus 30% of baby boomers. How often they shop? Well, they're frequent shoppers. They're shopping often. And again, this is where stage of life plays a role, because this is a stage of life where they have to acquire new wardrobes, new things for the house. Some are starting school, the younger ones. Some are starting their careers, and some are starting families. So when you start a family, your needs for home textiles usually increase quite a bit. The same with starting careers, and somewhat for starting school. So almost half of them are shopping for clothing twice a month or more often. And more than 20% are shopping twice a month or more often for home textiles. And this is considerably higher than those in other generations, particularly compared to the baby boomers. So let's see what they have to say and what they're thinking. As before, we're starting by looking at their attitudes about climate change. And from there, we're going to move into their attitudes about the textile industry and textile sustainability, and then the role of brands, the role of certifiers, trust and transparency. What about climate change? Like people of all generations, millennials are very concerned about climate change. If you recall, we gave them 16 subjects, and we said to people, pick the 5 that worry you the most. And this is very similar to what emerged globally. For millennials, climate change was actually tied for second place, put it that way, with my personal finances, and just behind terrorism. So very, very important. 40% of millennials chose climate change as a key, one of their top 5 concerns, keeping them up at night, so to speak. Again, 82% of millennials said climate change is a real and very serious problem, and almost 80% also attributed it to emissions from human activities. So, like others globally, millennials are taking responsibility for climate change. And this is very similar. These numbers are very similar, slightly higher than the global average. Millennials also feel that they can take small steps to reduce climate change. So only 39% said my actions cannot reverse climate change. Most think that they can have an influence. What about the motivators? When we look at motivators for interest in climate change or climate change behaviors, sustainability behaviors, we're looking at two factors usually. One are what we call close to home or personal factors, and the other are more global, more altruistic factors, thinking about the planet, the future, other people, etc. And if you look at this table, the close to home factors are in red, and the more what we call altruistic factors are in blue, and they're absolutely balanced. Absolutely balanced. The two things I usually look for are keeping me and my family safe and healthy as representative of close to home, and then preserving the earth for future generations as the more altruistic, and they're perfectly balanced. Why is that? Well, in speaking with many millennials about the subject, they do tend to think systemically about the interconnectedness of planetary and human health and sustainability. So the concept that what happens to the planet happens to us and vice versa, the connectedness is important to them. What about their behavior? So, like those in other generations, 70% of millennials say, I'm committed to living a sustainable, environmentally friendly lifestyle. And you'll see that as we learn in every sustainability study we do, they usually start by looking at their diet, what they're eating. And you can see that there, 66% have purchased organic foods, and 58% have purchased natural or organic personal care products. They're changing to more natural diet. They are adopting a more environmentally friendly means of transportation, and they're trying to avoid brands or companies that they feel are not friendly to the environment or to those making the products. There'll be more about that later because the brand piece is extremely important here. And again, we see that they're aspiring to a healthy lifestyle. They're not 100% there yet, but the aspiration is there. One of the questions was, how do you keep up with information about climate change? And I don't think it will come as any surprise to anyone that the internet and social media are very important. So if you look at the sources, if you look at the middle row, mainstream media, that's the most important source for baby boomers. Millennials are still paying attention to mainstream media, 60% of them, but they're far more likely to be using the internet and particularly social media in learning about climate change, especially compared to baby boomers. So the internet, it's 69% versus 55% for the boomers, but social media, there you have it. 55% millennials goes down to 39% for Gen X, but only 25% of boomers are paying attention to social media. In this regard, the use of social media and the internet, we believe, is really informing the millennial generation about issues related to textiles and the textile industry, and you'll see that in a moment. So a few quotes directly from millennials. I want to be a good steward of the earth that was gifted to me. It's so much better for society to have our products made conscientiously. It's time to appreciate the world and take better care of it in any way we can. The world is headed towards disaster, so we have to do everything possible, meaning buying sustainable products, supporting industries that produce environmentally friendly products, and thinking about those who work in those industries. Now we're going to start looking more specifically at the textile piece. And it is with respect to textiles and the textile industry that differences between the millennials and others become evident. So in terms of climate change, you might have noticed they're not that different from others. Yes, in their media use, but in terms of thinking about climate change as very, very, very crucial and aspiring to live differently, they pretty much align with the other generations. But now you'll start seeing some differences. So first of all, they're a little bit more knowledgeable, or they say they're a little bit more knowledgeable about the industry. And this again is small, but please remember, we're looking at very large populations, 3,000 to 4,000 people here. So in each of the generations, so that even small differences can mean something. And so whereas 42% of baby boomers said, I don't know much about the way textiles are closed or produced, that drops to 38% for millennials. And the reason I showed you this is that I want to show you the next slide, which kind of proves the point. So if you recall, we presented 10 facts that are commonly shown in the media, in articles about the impact of the textile industry. And again, what we were looking for were facts from legitimate sources, certainly, and also that represented the type of thing that people read or they see them in documentaries. And we asked people two questions. One, are you aware of each of these? And secondly, do they have an impact on the way you think about the textile industry? Now, please do keep in mind that we showed these facts at the end of the survey. We didn't want to influence them at the beginning of the survey, but I wanted to pull it forward here because it does illustrate the fact that they are more aware overall. And again, even a 6 or 7% difference means something with this large sample size that we have for each of the generations. So this isn't all 10 facts, but it's pretty representative. And you can see that for all of these, millennials are more aware. If you look at the bottom one, that's a 14% spread between millennials and baby boomers. So we talk about a buzz that's been created about the textile industry, and here you can see evidence that this buzz is a little louder among this generation, and that could be related to their frequent use of the internet and social media, bringing these facts bringing their awareness to these facts. One of the results of this higher degree of knowledge is that the textile industry is viewed as a more serious polluter among the millennials than it is just slightly more among Gen X, but particularly compared with baby boomers. We gave people a list of various industries and said, pick the 3 that you consider to be the worst polluters. And 26% of millennials picked the textile industry versus 16% of baby boomers. Here's how the millennials listed the industries in terms of worst polluters. The energy industry at the top, the car industry, the food industry, and right behind it, the textile industry. Not that much further ahead than some of the others. However, the millennials placed the textile industry in 4th place. The global sample had it in 6th place. So again, this is more evidence of a buzz starting to build about the textile industry. What about harmful substances? And here again, we start getting into territory where you see a generation that is more nervous. So right at the beginning, I said, here's a generation that has grown up with environmental degradation. And so they are more concerned relative to the baby boomers. And that goes for food, it goes for personal care, and for clothes. 43% of millennials are extremely or very concerned about harmful substances versus 31% of boomers. And home textiles, 41% are extremely or very concerned versus 31% of baby boomers. So one of the points that I made previously is that there's only a 20% lag between food and clothes. In fact, for clothes for millennials, it's less than 20% difference. 20% for home textiles. And this is a sign that the textile piece is very much on the horizon, and it's kind of catching up with with food and personal care in the adoption cycle of sustainable concerns and behaviors. That's not a very big difference. The other thing that I'll point out is that millennials in manufacturing countries like India and China are far more concerned about harmful substances in clothes and home textiles than those elsewhere. Much, much, much higher levels of concern. So let's think again about the millennial life stage, where they are in life. And when we look at concerns about harmful substances, a subgroup of huge importance emerges, and that is parents of babies and young kids. And I don't know why part of my diagram has disappeared, but that's okay. Millennials made up 52% of the group parents of babies and young kids. That's kids age 6 and under. Gen X, 42%, and then the baby boomers was very small. It was 46% of them. I'm sorry that the diagram isn't showing up, but it's not the most important. So whenever I work on sustainability projects, the attitudes and behaviors really get a kickstart with parenthood. It is the #1 catalyst of change, as people say, oh my gosh, I've got to pay attention to what I eat, to what I put on the body, on my baby's body, to the type of home cleaning products that I use, etc. So wellness and sustainability both become very important. In the slides that follow, again, I've tried to color code it. So the parents of young kids are in a kind of light blue. Parents overall, so anyone with a child in the household, are in a darker blue, and no kid households are in purple. Just a word about the households without kids. Who are they? Well, they're respondents who haven't yet had kids, so they're not thinking in the same way, as you'll see, and some who are in the older generation who don't have kids at home. Does that mean, I just wanted to mention that you're going to see evidence that parents are much more engaged, especially if they're parents of young kids. Does that mean that once they become older and the kids leave the house, they're no longer engaged? Well, not at all. We know that these behaviors, once you become sustainable in your lifestyle, you don't tend to drop it. You don't stop recycling just because the kids leave the home. But again, in the older age group that we have, climate change was a non-issue when this group came of age, and so therefore these aren't necessarily behaviors that are that they've been following throughout the course of their life. So I just wanted to make that point. Let's look again at the concern about harmful substances chart for parents of young kids versus parents versus those without kids in the household. And you'll see that for each of the products that we're looking at, again, parents of young kids and parents are ahead of those in no kid households. So that food, 68-66, versus 49% of those in households without kids. Personal care, between the parents of young kids and those without kids, there's a 20% difference. Clothing, 51% of parents of young kids are extremely or very concerned about harmful substances. This is and 48% of home textile of them are extremely concerned about their home textiles. This is something that you really have to pay attention to. First of all, it's way higher than those in no-kid households. And second of all, having 1/2 of this population not just concerned, but extremely or very concerned about harmful substances, that's a very significant number. So this is really, this is me saying this is really important. If you look at the third bullet point, in China, 82% of parents of young kids and babies are extremely or very concerned. In India, 77%. So again, in the manufacturing countries, this all takes there's a much more intense dimension to these for these issues. How important are safety from harmful substances and responsible, environmentally and socially responsible production? These are important for everyone, and the numbers that you see, again, these are those who rated these features extremely highly. So there's not a great deal of difference here. Everybody finds safety and responsible production very, very important. But again, parents of young kids are ahead of the curve, not as dramatically, but they're ahead of the curve. So it's another signal that as kids come into the household, people do become more engaged in sustainability attitudes and behaviors. Also, when you look at who's aware of and who's buying eco-friendly products, comparing awareness for clothing of parents of young kids with those without kids in the household, 86 to 76%, and purchase 42% versus 31%. This is general clothing. Home textiles, the same, higher awareness and higher purchase. But take a look for home textiles, the difference between purchase for parents of young kids and people in no-kid households is more significant. It's 16%. And why? Well, you have a baby or a young child, you're wrapping them in all kinds of home textiles, so it becomes important. And on the right, you can see that in terms of articles for babies and young children, 54% of parents of babies and young children have purchased eco-friendly clothes and home textiles for young children. I was just going to make a quick point about that. Yes. So how did we define eco-friendly? We just said these are clothes produced in an environmentally sustainable way. We gave people a long list of adjectives and said, pick those that describe the way you, that describe for you eco-friendly clothes. This was only asked of people who are aware of eco-friendly textiles. And if you take a quick look down the two left-hand columns, the yellow and the brown, you can see that millennials are more inclined than baby boomers to think positively about eco-friendly clothes. If you look at parents of young kids versus people in no-kid households, you'll see a much bigger difference. 40% say high quality versus 26% of no-kid households. The same for innovative. An even bigger gap about soft, because of course if you have young kids, it's really important that your clothing and home textiles be soft. So this is more important, and they rate them much, the eco-friendly clothing and home textiles, or clothing, this is for clothing, sorry, much more highly. And a few quotes from parents. I never worried about harmful substances before, but after my daughter was born, I started to become interested in ingredients and personal care products. Now I want to learn as much as possible about clothing safety and responsibility. It's very important for me. I always buy eco-friendly clothes for my baby girl because her skin is very sensitive and soft, and the products are good for the health of the whole family. I want my kids to be exposed to as few chemicals as possible. feels good just knowing. It feels good just knowing. That's kind of interesting that I bought a product that isn't harmful. There's a little emotional benefit for you right there. What about trust and transparency? Well, millennials have very high demands for trust and transparency. So they're not taking claims at face value. We asked those aware of eco-friendly items if they check to see whether claims like eco-friendly or sustainable are true. Always, often, sometimes, rarely, or never. And 69% of millennials are checking at least sometimes for clothing. And even more so when you look at parents of babies and young kids, 3 and 4 are checking claims always, often, or sometimes. Let's compare that to other generations. So this is a bit of a complicated slide here, but it separates clothing from home textiles, and for each shows how many are checking at least sometimes, but also how many are checking always or often. So it's quite obvious if you look at the first 2 columns that millennials are checking more often in both cases than boomers plus. But looking at the 2 right-hand columns, parents of young kids are checking claims much more frequently than those in no-kid households. Much more frequently, all the way down the line. 74% versus 55%. 34% are checking claims on clothing always or often versus 15%. Or at least they think they're doing that by whatever way they define checking. They believe that they are checking, and that again is really, really important for brands, retailers who are selling clothing and home textiles. Environmentally safe clothing is best for my kids because it's usually natural and less harsh for their skin. Buying eco-friendly clothing is my way of keeping the environment safe and pollution-free for the next generation, and it's also a way to teach my kids to respect nature. Clothing is an important part of life, and it's important to know what we're wearing. And then from one of the manufacturing countries, my country is so badly polluted that if we can't take responsibility for keeping the earth pollution free, at least we can keep ourselves away from harmful substances. It's so important that our clothes degrade and not cause more pollution. I think you'll see from these quotes, as I mentioned in my last webinar, that people were really taking the time to write very thorough, thoughtful answers. And usually we're using very good grammar, good choice of words. They were spelling correctly. It's quite remarkable in a survey of this length, and it was the same for millennials. So what about brands and certifiers? Are they interested in and have they purchased? Do they think they've purchased certified textiles? Well, we asked very close to the beginning of the survey, we asked people, would you be interested in knowing if the clothing or the home textiles that you wear have been certified to be safe from harmful substances and responsibly produced? We didn't only ask about clothing and home textiles. We asked about the food, personal care products, home care products, a range of items to disguise clothes and home textiles a little. And as we saw before, there are high levels of interest in certification and reasonably high purchases indicated. In terms of interest, millennial parents of young kids are not hugely more interested, slightly more interested. But when you look at purchase, again, this is pretty significant. More say, yes, I have purchased clothing that's been certified or home textiles that have been certified than the total population. Again, if you look at millennials overall, the numbers aren't as high as for parents of young kids, and that's because some of them have not had kids yet. And again, new parenthood is a strong catalyst to sustainable behaviors. So why are they purchasing certified clothing? We also asked why they're interested, and the numbers were pretty much the same. So like other consumers, There are concerns about harmful substances. There are concerns about environmental impact. And in addition, there are concerns about worker safety and allergic reactions. I look for a certification label to know if a brand is eco-friendly and reaffirm my decision to buy it. So this does get translated into purchase behavior and purchase decision for some millennials. There are two reasons why I purchase certified clothing. First, I try to avoid exposing myself and my family to chemicals, and I want to support companies that are manufacturing clothing that is not harmful to people or to the environment. I thought I'd share with you quite a few quotes about this because it's kind of interesting to see the language that millennials are using. The first one says, if clothing is certified, it ensures that it's good quality. And I put that in red because as I read through comments that have been written by people, quite a few of them said that if an item of clothing is certified, it implies that it's good quality. So I wanted to make that point via this quote. I buy certified clothes to promote healthy workers, a healthy earth, and healthy wearers of clothing. Certification is important because I can't tell by looking at tags and other labels if the products I buy are as good as they claim to be. Buying certified clothes is my first step towards the prevention of the environmental damage caused by our present lifestyles. It allows me to help the environment even in a small way and make better decisions about the clothes I buy. I put that in red because, again, we learned right from the get-go that people want to make small contributions, take small steps towards a solution and not be part of a problem. This consumer society pushes us to keep buying more and more and more. When we buy certified clothing, we can lighten our footprint. What about brands? I said a little earlier that brands are particularly important for millennials and parents of young kids. And so here you see some of the data from parents of babies and young kids versus those in no-kid households about brands. And you can see that the brand piece is important. And by brands, we mean clothing brands, home textile brands to a degree, but also retail brands. So 49% of parents of young kids like to know the values and principles of brands of clothing they buy, versus 36% of those in households without kids. 42% like to know what small steps brands have taken to be more sustainable, even if they're not fully green, was the end of that sentence. And 41% have tried to avoid brands or companies they felt were not friendly to the environment or to textile workers. I'm willing to put money towards supporting companies that do not harm the earth and help them be sustainable. It's good to know I'm contributing. That's that small step coming up again. So also, brand sustainability practices are more important. For example, parents of babies and young kids are more likely than those in child-free households to check a brand's sustainability practices when they check if the eco claims that are being made are true. So when we asked, how do you check if claims like eco-friendly and sustainable are true, 40% of parents of young kids said, I check the brand sustainability practices versus 26% of those in no-kid households, which doesn't mean that it's not important to those in no-kid households, but I'm demonstrating here the difference with parents generally and with parents of babies and young children. The importance of the whole subject takes on a deeper hue, a deeper dimension. They're also, as you can see, more likely to check social media or other online sources. That has to do partially with their age. They're younger. So I checked social media or other online sources to see if the eco claims are true, 37% versus 23%. So millennials, we asked people why they don't check or they rarely check if claims like sustainable and eco-friendly are true. And one of the items that we included was, I don't want to take the time. And here we go. Millennials, 23% of those who rarely or never check claims like eco-friendly or sustainable say it's because I don't want to take the time, versus 14% of baby boomers. So they're more likely to say, I don't have time to do this. In the first webinar, we talked about brand name and a certification label as being a kind of code, a shortcut to trust and transparency. So because there's a time element, this shortcut aspect is even more important for millennial consumers and for parents, especially parents of babies and young kids. So, so you can see the evidence of how important certification is. Brand name, be it clothing brand, home textile brand, retail brand, is to these populations. And the shortcut factor, the code factor is very important. They're already predisposed to look for certification, to look for anything that heightens their trust and transparency, because they're more concerned about harmful substances, they're more concerned about environmental impact, and they're more aware and more predisposed to certification. Even if we do a lot of our own research about a brand, it can be hard to figure out where and how ethically clothes and other textiles are made. It's great to have a source of validation of claims. Even though nothing can be 100%, a label like OEKO-TEX gives me almost complete trust that the clothing I buy is free of chemicals. Clear information stops me from buying clothes that aren't safe or that are produced in an irresponsible way. It's really urgent that every person takes responsibility. OEKO-TEX is like a guide. And there we have it in the last quote. Certified clothing is a simple way to guarantee that the clothing I buy is free from chemicals. With OEKO-TEX, I know the research has been done better than what I could do, and I can trust it. I want to make sure intelligent, informed choices. I want to make intelligent, informed choices in my purchases. OEKO-TEX seems dedicated to making the earth better. So what does it mean? And there are some millennials on their social media. The future is almost now. So we learned generally, if you recall, that as people increasingly learn about the impact of textile production, the more likely they shift in attitudes and behaviors as they seek to live a better textile life, and brands and marketers should be ready. Because as the buzz increases in the language we used last time, as people learn more, they become more engaged. Millennials prove the point. They're already more aware of the buzz about the industry, and the fact that they're more critical of the textile industry substantiates our forecasts for the future. As such, millennials give us a glimpse into that future, a future where there is a heightened need for transparency and trust between consumers, brands, and retailers. Textile certification can play an important role in establishing that trust. The times they are changing. For those old enough to remember to know one of the early Bob Dylan songs, and millennials are harbingers of the change. These are transformative times, and millennials are in the vanguard. What do millennials want? They want easy assurances that the products they buy and the brands they favor are doing the right thing to help them live a better textile life. Millennials are a population with heightened sensitivity to false claims and a greater need for transparency and validation. Given this sensitivity, they're quicker to recognize greenwashing, or what I call truth washing, and thereby lose faith in the brands they want to trust. If you market to millennials the need for demonstrations of trust, the communication that we are a conscious brand and are aware that you want to live a better textile life could quickly become an imperative. If we are indeed approaching a tipping point in textile sustainability, millennials are driving us there on the internet highway. If you market to parents of young children, the imperative is greater. Their concerns about toxic substances are real. They have real concerns. You saw that with 1 and 2 being extremely or very concerned. Even if you don't market to millennials, for example, if your audience is older, it's still important to take heed. Millennials are already the loudest voice in the marketplace. They shop more often than others. They're coming into positions of leadership and dominance. Their values are soon to become the norm. Millennials, of course, will soon be older. What about their kids? Kids being raised on a consumer diet of trust and transparency. What about the kids of millennials? Kids. So that's our report on millennials and young parents. We hope you enjoyed it. There will be new insights presented sometime later in the spring, and OEKO-TEX will be at the Outdoor Retailers Show in Denver and at the India International Garment Fair in New Delhi. If you want to speak face-to-face about the survey. Also, I know that Karen has captured your questions and has possibly already answered some, but answers will be coming, and I want to thank you. For more information, this is my contact information, or you can contact Anna Czerwinska at OEKO-TEX. And there is that contact information. I'll leave it up for a couple of seconds.
Thank you, Ellen. That was so interesting, and I'm sure everybody that was on today really enjoyed Chapter 2 of this incredible study sponsored by OEKO-TEX.
Thank you very much, Karen. It was my pleasure.
And once again, for those of you who may have joined us after the start, we will be following up on any questions that we received directly with those who send in the questions, as well as everyone attending today and that signed up for the webinar will be receiving the presentation along with a link to this webinar within the next week. So thank you all for joining us, and we appreciate your time this morning, and we look forward to the next chapter in the Key to Confidence research from OEKO-TEX. Thank you all for joining us today. Bye-bye. but it doesn't, it's still recording. Okay. Right. Yeah, I pushed all these buttons and I'm like, yeah, sure. Right. Yeah, I tried all sorts of things, but I couldn't leave the webinar. Yes.